Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. I'm joined today with Sofia, who manages an Instagram account called Stress Tools, which essentially provides free advice on anxiety and how to deal with stress. She's also a fully qualified High Intensity CBT Therapist. Sofia, thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you for having me.
And how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, thank you.
Great. I'm really excited to talk to you because I think a lot of people are going through stress, a lot of people going through anxiety, and there can never be enough resource for it, really. And one of the questions that I was thinking about asking you is, what is the difference between stress and anxiety? Like, how would you distinguish the two and define the two?
Yeah, so they're very similar, but there is a subtle difference. So stress is the physiological response we experience in our body because of a situation we're going through that's really pressurizing or demanding. But usually once that situation has passed, that physiological response goes away. However, with anxiety, we experience that same physiological response, but it continues even when that situation has gone away. And it's usually accompanied by us worrying or thinking catastrophically about how things are going to turn out. So anxiety is the mindset and the physiology, whereas stress is more the physiology.
Okay. The physiology side of things similar with stress and anxiety?
Yeah, very similar. It's known as the fight or flight response. So it's essentially the changes that happen in our body to help us either face a stressful situation head on or escape it, depending on what's going to be best at the time.
I've heard it called fight, flight or freeze recently, which I think I'm probably a freezer, to be honest. And I try and assess the situation. I'm probably panicking, like, what should I do? But I think it's really interesting how people react to those differently. But at the same time, the way that you are meant to deal with it is quite similar, I imagine, like the steps that you're meant to take. So that's something I'm really excited to ask you about, is how does someone like look after themselves better when they're going through stress or anxiety?
Yeah, I think the first step is always self-awareness. So understanding what is going on for you and how you're feeling about it, both on a physical level, on an emotional level, and also how you're thinking about it. I think when you build competence in understanding that automatically puts you one step ahead. And then after that, it's just about knowing, you know, what tools you have in your toolbox and what's going to work best. Is it going to be something that's more orientated to your physiology, maybe towards your breathing, towards calming yourself, you know, exercise, eating, sleep, all that good stuff?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be tools more tailored towards your mindset? So understanding any unhelpful thinking that you may have and thinking about how to reframe it. So not that so it's, you know, more positive, but so it's more balanced and accurate and reflective of what's actually going on. Because usually it's the way we think about situations that causes more stress and anxiety than the actual situation itself.
That was really interesting. It reminds me of one of the things Dr. Nate Zinsser and I talked about, which is giving yourself affirmations and how some of them are perceived as lies. They're positive and they're perceived as a little bit delusional, as he describes them. But people are so quick to listen to the negatives and unrealistic criticisms of what they think about themselves or their performance and things. So I wonder if there's any balance to that, like by saying, okay, you know what, I'm just going to try some exaggerated positive things to kind of get myself feeling a little bit more realistic, and where that realistic perspective really comes from. Like, is there a little bit of limitations to what you can do because you don't believe in it and you don't believe in yourself enough? And I think with anxiety, it can be quite crippling, can't it? It can be something that prevents you from growth, essentially. Do you think like people are able, anyone, you, me, anyone in society is able to use these tools that you call them and essentially improve that type of thinking and that type of mental issues? Or is it something where some people, it's impossible to actually get them to kind of start thinking like that?
That's a good question. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it comes down to the individual's willingness to change and to want change for themselves and to recognize something as a problem. Because unless you have that willingness, you're not going to be able to make that many changes. But I think that, back to this negative, positive thinking, it's really important to understand that a lot of our thinking is not factual. It's automatic judgments, and that's usually based on how we were brought up, our culture, the experiences that have shaped us. And, it's usually based on repeated past experiences that we've had. And while that thinking may have been relevant in the past, it's really important to think about how relevant it is in the here and now. And that's where that self-awareness comes in. And it's really important to make sure you're aware of the facts of the situation and you base your thinking off those facts rather than off emotions or of any automatic judgments. So that's why I think, again, self-awareness is key, that ability to pause and reflect, understand what's going through your mind, assess the situation and think about, does my thinking actually align with the situation and the facts of it? Or am I just going on autopilot and bringing in the past into the here and now?
It's interesting how you describe it as autopilot, because that to me says that they've almost disciplined themselves to think in these negative ways. Is CBT a way of retraining the brain so that when they do go on autopilot, maybe it's a bit easier and a bit nicer?
Yeah, exactly. It's just about recognizing unhelpful ways of thinking and also behaving and just reframing them. So again, we're not changing negative to positive, we're changing negative to balanced and realistic. And I don't know if you've heard of the term neuroplasticity.
Yes, I have, yeah.
And, there's this saying like, neurons that get fired get wired. So
oh, cool, I like that.
Initially, it'll be difficult. As with any change, it's difficult. But if you keep persevering and keep pushing and you want that change, strong enough, then you're able to actually reframe that autopilot thinking into what you want it to be like. So
how long does it take?
I guess it's different for everyone, but I'd say on average, they say it takes about a month, 30 days to actually change a habit. So if you are really disciplined and persistent with it, then you should be able to notice changes. I'm not saying they're going to be miraculous changes. You need to spend more time than just a month, but I think it'll be enough to give you that motivation to keep going.
How did you kind of discover CBT and therapy?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I had just graduated from my psychology degree and, I was learning about mental health, about depression, anxiety, but it was always something that I was studying rather than something I thought I could experience myself, And I went through some situations that basically put me in quite a dark place. And I went to my doctor and I told her what I was experiencing. And she said, you sound like you really could use some therapy. I'm going to refer you for some CBT. And in my mind, I just thought, she's going to section me. I must be crazy. I've gone mad. Like, why am I getting put in therapy? I don't go to therapy. And it was just interesting to realize, even though I had studied psychology, the amount of internalized stigma I had myself around mental health. So at that point, I thought, things are so bad, I'll try anything. So I attended CBT. I went there for several months and it was honestly life-changing. It just made me feel more empowered and realize that I'm not a victim to my circumstances. It's more about the way I think and how I'm responding to life. That's kind of keeping me stuck in a vicious cycle. And I learned some tools to break out of that cycle. And I really started to notice changes. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Why wasn't I taught this in school? Why weren't any of us taught this? Why, is this not just something standard that we have access to? And I thought, what my therapist did for me, I want to do for other people. And since then, it was just a mission of mine to just become a therapist and help people in the same way I was helped.
And that's how you started Stress Tools?
Yeah, so with Stress Tools, that came a bit later down the line. So after a few years of working as a therapist, part of my role was to do assessments. So we sort of assess new referrals into the service and think about whether they're suitable or, if they are, then put them on the waiting list. And what was happening is that people were getting put on waiting lists for 8 months, a year. And I thought, that is ridiculous. The fact that you've reached a point where you've been so brave and courageous to open up up and ask for help, and for somebody to tell you, okay, well, thanks for letting me know your deepest struggles, but here you go on the waiting list for a year. I just thought that's so cruel and wrong. And I thought, I just ended up feeling helpless having to do that week in, week out. So I thought if I could just create a platform and just share insights that I've learned through, my experience as a therapist, my own personal experiences, then that could hopefully resonate with someone. And even if it's just one person and it helps them, then that's better than nothing. And Instagram is by no means therapy, but if I could just give people some validation and tools to just build on their resilience, then that would make me feel a bit less helpless. So
definitely. And you've got over 10,000 followers?
Yeah.
So you've probably helped more than one person.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, do your followers ever speak to you and reach out to you?
Yeah, honestly, some of them are so lovely, just so kind, and it's just so heartwarming when they reach out and say, what you've posted has helped me so much. It's helped me understand myself a bit better. I never thought of things like that. It makes it worth it, I think. 100%. Yeah.
Well, what's next for Stress Tools?
What's next? Well, I've got ambitious plans, as you know.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm working on an ebook, which I want it to be for free,
Cool.
so people can download it. And it's basically focusing on how we think. So as I said earlier, usually, I think 99% of the time, the way we think about a situation causes more stress and anxiety than the situation itself. And if people can build awareness of any unhelpful thinking patterns, then that's always the first step, I think, to managing stress. So that ebook is focusing on that, looking at 10 common unhelpful thinking patterns that we're prone to getting trapped in, and just thinking about which ones resonate with you and what you can do going forward. And aside from that, on a bigger scale, I'm thinking about creating workshops that people can, attend, and courses, perhaps an app even. So yeah, just getting those tools and resources out, to a larger scale audience is the main goal right now of Stress Tools.
And that kind of answers the challenge or the problem that you faced at the very beginning when you heard that people had to wait like 8 months. Mm-hmm. You're kind of filling that gap for some people. So if they if they need to wait that long, I mean, do you know if the wait's still that long, or is it?
So it depends, I guess, on the area you live in. Different therapy services have different waiting lists, but, at best, I'd say it's a 3 to 4 month waiting list.
That's crazy.
Which is still too long in my opinion.
That's crazy. Because, like you said, people have taken the step forward to get the help, and they must be going through some stuff to be told, sorry, you're going to have to go through this for a few more months before you can talk to someone about it. That's quite crazy, isn't it?
It's insane.
I mean, how often in your experience does it actually get to the 3-month period that people have waited and then they don't do the therapy?
All too often, I think. Either the waiting list has increased in that time, so they're told wait another 2 months, or people have just got fed up. Yeah.
Oh my God.
People have got fed up and they've just decided that they don't want therapy anymore. Okay. And also, if you're, at a point where you've reached out for therapy, things are quite difficult. And within that 3-month time gap, so much more things can happen. And you'll get called for therapy because you reached the top of the waiting list. The therapist assesses you, but because your difficulties have become much more complex, they might say, well, we're going to signpost you to another service, which again has a longer waiting list. So it's not good at all.
No, it's not.
No.
If you're waiting for therapy, say I'm going through high intensity anxiety, I phone up the NHS and they say, sorry, we've got to wait a few months. What do you recommend people do during that waiting period?
I think, you need to be resourceful. I think you need to reach out for support, people around you. I think a lot of us think that sometimes saying we're struggling or reaching out for support is a sign of weakness, but I don't think it is. I think it's a sign of resourcefulness. And if you have at least one person that you genuinely feel you can trust and you feel safe with, then I think that's your best bet. Open up. Make sure that they're aware of how you're feeling and let them know what support you would benefit from. Just help them to help you. Because I think a lot of people are experiencing suicidal thoughts. A lot of people don't want to be here. And I think a lot of our close ones would much rather we open up to them and ask for support rather than it gets to a point where it's too late and now they're burying us. You know, that's how real it can be. So I think that's definitely the first thing. I think the second thing is just be kind to yourself. And if you need time out, take time out. Get signed off work. You know, if you can't cope, you can't cope. Do whatever it is that you need to do to make sure you're at least at a baseline level of being okay. Obviously there's the stuff like sleep, exercise, diet, but if we're real, you know, I think if things are really bad, those things usually go out the window. So,
I'm ordering a pizza if I'm upset.
Exactly. And sometimes, you know, be kind to yourself and let yourself have that, because that might be something that might make you feel a bit better. But definitely, you know, being resourceful and reaching out for help from somebody that you trust, and just being kind with yourself and allowing yourself to take a break and pause in life. You know, the world isn't going to stop turning. You know, I honestly believe if the world won't stop turning if you take a rest, but you will absolutely collapse if you don't.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
You know, as I said earlier, anxiety is characterized by that catastrophic thinking. So I think really get to know your thoughts, and I think writing them down. So whenever you notice yourself feeling intensely anxious or in a high anxious state, just write down what's going through your mind. And usually you'll find it's the worst case scenario. And then ask yourself, okay, how likely is it for this to happen? You know, and if it is likely to happen, how am I going to cope? You know, actually run through that scenario in your head and think about all the ways that you're going to cope, because sometimes that can be enough to help you feel a bit more confident in your ability to get through whatever you're feeling anxious about.
So you mean like script it?
Yeah, like literally script it.
Like write it down.
Yeah, write it down. Pen and paper, you can do it on your phone. Just get your thoughts out of your head. Create that distance, because when you create that distance, you can start to see things more objectively.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you can also think about, you know, there's this thing called hypothetical worries and practical worries. So when we have worries, it might feel like they're all just worries, but they usually fall under two camps, hypothetical and practical. Practical worries are usually about situations that are happening or that will definitely happen, and we do have a degree of control over. Whereas hypothetical worries usually begin with a what if, and they're about hypothetical situations. They may or may not happen, but at this stage you have no way of knowing. So it really is a hypothetical scenario. And if something is hypothetical, that's where, you know, grounding exercises, breathing exercises, here and now focus exercises really help. If it's something practical, make an action plan. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? Who do you need help from, you know, about doing it? And just see that plan through. So I think definitely writing down and understanding what it is you're worrying about is really important.
So again, it kind of goes back to the discipline you were talking about earlier, because they'd have to introduce this new habit of journaling. Because I think what many of us are guilty of doing is spending a lot of time digesting content and entertainment, and then going to bed, and then wondering why our heads are racing. And a lot of the clients I speak to are doing things where they are constantly trying to achieve, or they're constantly moving around, they're not meditating, they're not doing any yoga, there's no point in their day where they stop and just process. And I think journaling is such a good idea, because I mean, I've journaled myself. At one point when I was going through some heavy stuff, I was journaling every day, and just doing that habit was really good. I mean, do you think, as part of like your role when you're giving therapy to people, do you help people develop better routines?
Yeah, 100%. Because like you said, I think a lot of us are just running off autopilot day to day, and we're just getting up, feeling anxiety, trying to escape it, distract ourselves from it, whatever it is we do to cope, consuming content. And I think that's another thing with content, you know, the Insta therapy world has, you know, really grown. And in a way, I think although it's good, I think it serves as a distraction technique as well, because we're fooling ourselves into thinking, yeah, I'm reading about this, I'm building self-awareness. But when it comes down to it, do you really know yourself, or do you know theory and information about stress and anxiety management? So yeah, I feel like I've gone off a tangent a bit, but definitely having a routine where you incorporate building self-awareness and really sitting with yourself, and acknowledging what's going through you emotionally, mentally, physically. I think that's such an important part to having your routine every single day if you really do want to overcome anxiety.
Do you talk about yoga? Do you talk about meditation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it depends where people are on their journey. I mention it to some people, they look at me like I've said the most ridiculous thing. They dismiss it straight away. But I feel, you can't separate the mind from the body. It's all one system. And yeah, you can have all the mindset tools, but you also need to make sure you can get your body to a calm and regulated state as well, because that will impact your mind too. So for clients who are receptive to it, I definitely do recommend incorporating that into their routine. One
of the things I was really interested to ask you about was activities and environments that encourage improvement from anxiety, from stress, and those that essentially make it worse. Have you acknowledged what those things are throughout your career and had to talk about that with certain people that maybe, creating this environment might help, or drinking a lot of alcohol is probably not helping here? Like, what are the common things that you've seen that you think from an activity and from an environment perspective help versus exacerbate?
Okay, we could start with what exacerbates, because I think that's more easier to begin with, because I think when we're stressed, when we're anxious, a lot of us have coping strategies that definitely help in the short term. They help us get through it, but in the long term, they make things worse. They make us feel more stressed, more anxious, even more depressed. So you mentioned alcohol. Definitely makes sense. You've had a very stressful day. Why not have a few glasses of wine? Why not have a few drinks? But if that becomes a habit and you keep doing it, you're going to notice negative side effects, because alcohol is a depressant at the end of the day. So while it gets you to this sort of higher state of mind when you're a bit tipsy, when you're a bit drunk, you're going to come down eventually. And that crash can actually make you feel worse than what you felt like before you actually started drinking. And you just get caught in the cycle, because you have that crash, you want to come up again, so you have more alcohol, then you come down after. So alcohol, definitely be mindful with it. I'm not, I think everyone has personal responsibility. I'm not here to tell people what they should or shouldn't do, but just be mindful of how it affects you, and does it actually help you out in the long term? If it does, then go for it. But I think most people find it doesn't. Same with recreational drugs as well. How helpful is that to you in the long term? I think a lot of people also isolate themselves when they're feeling stressed and anxious. It makes sense, because you might be on edge, you might be irritable, you don't want to be around people, so you become quite withdrawn. But in the long term, that's not helpful, because you're missing out, on a lot of opportunities to just be around people. And we're social creatures, so our brains are wired to function at their best when we're around others. But when we isolate ourselves, that's when we can go into a deeper spiral, a deep hole. Things can feel a bit more hopeless. So definitely the alcohol, the drugs, the self-isolation, also the food you're putting into your body as well. I think when we're stressed and anxious, we can perhaps not make the best options, best choices, and it's fine, if it's every now and then. But if it becomes a consistent pattern, then you need to be mindful of you're disrupting the balance in your body. You're not putting the best nutrients into it. Your mind and body are connected. Actually the connection between your gut and your brain is so strong. So if your gut isn't digesting the best food, that's going to have an impact on your mood and on how you're seeing things and how you're thinking and how you're feeling. So definitely be mindful of that. There's lots of other things that are unhelpful. They don't come to mind right now, but I think definitely what you're consuming. And you know what? Diet isn't just food and drink. It's also the social media content that you're consuming, just media in general that you're exposing yourself to. How much news are you watching? Because that stuff can really it can warp your perception of what life is actually like. So yeah, be mindful of that. But I think in terms of environments, or activities that can be helpful, is spending time in nature. I think 100%. It can sound really cliche, just spend time in nature, go for a walk. But the human I guess the modern day human is so different to what we were like in our ancestral past. And I think we were really disconnected from nature. I think we are a part of nature, but we're just, the way life is, we're just so disconnected from it. And that can lead to a feeling of being disconnected from ourselves. And that's when depression and anxiety can kick in. So definitely, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, to just be outside, feel the sun on your skin, just feel the wind, feel the elements. I think that's so important. And also exercise is really helpful too. There's actually a lot of evidence to say that exercising for half an hour a day is just as effective as taking antidepressants for people who have mild to moderate depression. Yeah.
That's insane.
So, when we're stressed and anxious, we spoke about that fight, flight, freeze response. So your body is essentially getting ready to take some sort of action. But usually the stresses in modern day life, it's not, about escaping a tiger or, finding shelter or anything like that. It's more stress from work, relationships, friendships, those sort of things. And there's not much we can physically do to tackle that stress because it's more mental, but we've still got that fight or flight response in our body. So if we can exercise that and actually burn that adrenaline off, that can really help with our anxiety. So I think exercise is really important. And again, the people you surround yourself with, sort of going back to the content you're consuming, also the people you're around is so important. Because that you'll find there's people in your life that are very prone to folding as soon as things get hard or, the pressure hits, or they can fall into limited thinking, or they can they're not very good at helping create solutions. They're just more helpful at identifying problems. And, you can't control how people are, but you can control how much space they take up in your life. So really be aware of how people make you feel, what sort of outlook they have on life, and just curate your life based on that. And surround yourself with resilient individuals, I think, is really important.
People that will lift you up.
People that will lift you up, yeah.
And do you think that it's encouraged or discouraged that you do both in terms of medication and therapy?
So the research suggests that, as I said, exercise is just as effective as antidepressants for mild to moderate depression. But if your depression perhaps is a bit more on the severe end, they do say that taking an antidepressant as well as doing cognitive behavioral therapy has, a really, really good outlook for you. So I guess it's down to the individual, their own preference, their own choice. But, in my experience, I think a mixture of both can really serve people well.
In terms of how therapy's changed, a lot of it's done virtually now. So has that had a significant impact on how you give therapy? And is there a better way of doing it? Is it better to do it in person than it is to do it virtually?
It'll be quite a personal choice, both for the client and for the therapist, with regards to what works better. So at the moment, the way I deliver therapy is 4 days a week it's remote, and then 1 day a week I see clients face to face. Is one better than the other? I don't know. So with remote therapy, so that's over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, it helps with accessibility. So, people don't have to worry about getting to the location. They don't have to worry about perhaps taking time off work. They can fit into their lunch break. All they have to do is, turn on their laptop, join the meeting, they're there. And, I think it's great. It increases accessibility, but at the same time, I think it, again, at least that disconnection, that human disconnection, you're not in that person's energy. You're not developing that real life human-to-human connection. There's that barrier of the screen, which I find when you have face-to-face sessions, you feel that more. And it feels perhaps, I wouldn't say more authentic, but you feel that person, and you can actually feel the shift that the session is helping them, create. But I guess with face-to-face, there's a lot of people that, say they can't do technology, they don't want technology, they want to see their therapist in person. That's fine. And there's a lot of people that say, well, my life is so busy, I've got so many other commitments, I just want something remote, something I could maybe just get into my car, get my phone up, and then I'm there. So I don't know if one is better than another. I think both have their pros and cons, and it really comes down to the client and the therapist.
It's actually quite convenient that it's kind of moved in the direction it has in a way. It'd be interesting to take a look at the data and see if there's like how many more people it's helped, or if it's helped people better. But certainly when I think about when I was a lot younger and I had no car and my parents didn't have much money, and the closest place to go to was quite a long walk. There'd be be like an hour of walk. That's not something a teenager would necessarily be interested in doing regularly to get therapy. So I think the whole idea of it being rolled out on a virtual sense, I think that gives actually a lot of advantages. And like you said, some people are really busy, but I think the caveat to that is the common thing that I encounter is people say they're very busy all the time. And I don't think many of us are as busy as we think we are. It's just again, going back to smartphones, they are so good now. They're almost too good, right? And so TV shows are incredible. It's really easy to get any kind of form of entertainment now, and get a little bit addicted to your phone. And the amount of time that people rack up, even myself, time where I've looked at reports of like how long I've spent in an app, and I'm like, oh my god, I've spent an hour and 20 minutes in YouTube today. I didn't even feel like I did 20 minutes, so I think it's interesting when people decide not to do things in certain ways because they're too busy. I always think when I feel like I'm giving that reason to anyone, I kind of take a step back and go, am I really busy doing important things, or am I just living a lifestyle that's got a combination of really practical and useful things, but also maybe a bit lazy or a bit addictive, or things that, like, if I actually, again, going back to what you were saying with disciplining and in the routine of introducing something where I'm forcing myself to go out the house a bit more, like, taking the dogs for a walk or just going for a stroll, and then someone asks me to do something with them next week and I say I'm too busy, I'll feel probably a little bit better about that because I'm busy walking rather than busy sitting down. Do you find that, like, I mean, what's your kind of opinion on that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or do you think?
No, I definitely agree. I think, modern day living, it can be incredibly busy, but I think a lot of the time we make ourselves busier than we need to be because I think we're avoiding something inside ourselves, or we're distracting ourselves from something we don't want to face. And again, I feel like I mentioned earlier, you have to want that change. And I just have this theory where if you're not prioritizing that space for your own self-development, knowing yourself, sitting with yourself, then maybe you haven't suffered enough. You haven't hit low enough to feel that this is time for change to happen. And I think everyone's on their own journey. And, it can be frustrating when you look at some people and you think you could really do with this, you could really do with that. But unless they see it for themselves and they recognize it, there's no point of pushing it onto them. I think everyone will be ready when they're ready. But yeah, definitely, I feel we're not as busy as we claim to be. I think a lot of it is just us trying to run or distract ourselves from sitting with ourselves.
Yeah. Or I think it's that we do believe that we're busy, but we don't recognize the activities that are making up a busy lifestyle. Do you know what I mean? Like going back to what I said before, where a lot of my clients, they've, laughed in the face of meditation or yoga, but then when they do it and they introduce it for like 10 minutes, it completely turns their minds and lives around, and they start to recognize what you were talking about with self-love and self-empathy, because people don't generally take enough time for themselves, and everything is more convenient than it's ever been to do most things. 10 years ago, it's so much quicker to do now, but we're still really busy. Don't you think that's amazing? I think there is a really, with contemporary technology and what's available to us, there are ways to really take advantage of it and use it, but still read books and still take time for yourself and journal, like you said. I think all of the kind of traditional things that we've done to be more grounded and be happier are still exactly the same. It's like you said, going for a walk. It's just that we don't do that as much now because like I said, everything in terms of entertainment, in terms of like being able to do the shopping, we can do that from our sofa now. So we need more of a reason to like leave. And it's cold right now, so it's a lot easier to stay indoors, and especially working from home. I remember talking to you about like common trends that you had seen with what's causing people anxiety and stress, and we were talking about the cost of living was a real game changer for a lot of people panicking about how much money they had coming in and what they were going to do. I've heard crazy stories about people just not turning their heating on at all, which is really sad. And especially when I think about people who are a lot older or living alone, right? It's crazy to think what they're probably doing to try and manage. What were your experiences of what the pandemic did? Because I love what you said earlier about how try not to like self-isolate too much. I think some self-isolation makes sense to like maybe recharge the batteries or to just get some downtime, but obviously if you're kind of like not leaving the room for like a week, then there's probably a problem. So what do you think, what was your experience with the pandemic and how that kind of forced a lot of self-isolation?
No, it definitely did. And you know, as a therapist, what I noticed at work was that we were getting so at the start of the pandemic, the referrals died down because I think people had more pressing matters, you know, to deal with, as opposed to just going to therapy. Some people thought the world was ending, people were getting ill, people were dying. So I think everyone was in this sort of really heightened state of survival. But I think, you know, perhaps the summer of 2020, when people started to get more used to the new way of living, I think they had more time in that isolation period to really sit with themselves, and a lot of stuff they would have perhaps avoided, perhaps maybe because they would go out drinking on a Friday, couldn't do anymore. They'd, you know, fill up their weekends with all these activities, but they couldn't do that anymore. They were just forced to experience what was happening inside of them. And I think for a lot of people, they had a lot of breakthrough moments during the pandemic, and a lot of people did access therapy, and it helped them to, I guess, face issues that they otherwise maybe wouldn't have wanted to face or would have faced much further down the line. But I think for other people, it really did have a negative impact. I think that level of isolation, disconnection from family, friends, their routine really broke them to a certain extent. And it really made them also rethink their lives as well. I think a lot of people thought, I wasn't happy with my life before we went into this lockdown. And when this lockdown ends, I don't want to go back to living in that way. You know, what can I do? What changes can I make to make my life feel more fulfilling and more meaningful? So I think it affected lots of people in different ways, you know, depending on their level of self-awareness, what they were going through at the time, how happy or fulfilled they felt with their life at the time.
You've obviously helped like loads of people. What's been kind of a standout experience for you in terms of like someone in particular that you helped?
Gosh, so I've been doing this for over 5 years now. I'm just trying to think. There's I don't know if I can pinpoint it to just one. But what I would say has been a really standout moment for me is, you know, I've had some clients where initially I thought, oh, is this the best sort of therapeutic relationship? Am I the best therapist to be working with them? Could they perhaps have a better rapport with someone else? But, you know, we've sort of seen it through, and towards the end, the feedback I've got has just been so valuable and priceless, you know. And it's more about the feedback where I've just allowed them that space to be open and to be themselves and to not judge them. I think that's what's really made me aware of my own strengths as a therapist. I've realized, I used to think this was something that everyone can do, but over the years I've realized clearly it's not. But I try to see the person in front of me as they are, you know, regardless of what their past has been like, regardless of what they're going through. I feel the fact that they've got to this stage and the fact that they've been brave enough to seek help and commit to their own personal development, I think there's something so beautiful and resilient in that, and that's what I always try and hold at the forefront of my mind. And it's just, you know, it's a shame because the people I see are feeling depressed, they're feeling anxious, they doubt themselves so much, they have such low self-esteem. But what I see is just a really powerful, resilient individual who's decided to turn things around for themselves. So, yeah, I don't think there's been one standout person, but I think just the whole process of helping people build awareness and create a shift they want to see, that has been really valuable for me. Yeah.
Amazing. What does someone have to do to become a therapist? Say like someone watches and was like, oh, I'd love to do what she's doing, I want to help people as well. Like, what are the necessary steps they need to take?
So there's lots of different types of therapy. You know, the type of therapy that I do is cognitive behavioral therapy. So I can maybe tell you a bit about how I got to there. So you need a lot of experience working with people with mental health. That's the first and foremost thing that you do need. So after I went through my own therapy and I went on this mission to become a therapist, I worked for a mental health charity, and my role was something called the link worker. So I would go on inpatient wards in a psychiatric hospital, and I'd spend my time speaking to the patients, just finding out a bit about what their experience is like during their stay, what's going well, what isn't going well, and then I would feed that back to the multidisciplinary team. So, you know, the nurses, the support workers, psychiatrists, and that was just so we could create a bridge between the service users and the services, just so that the service being offered was really tailored to what the people needed. So I did that for a couple of years, and that was a very humbling experience. You know, I got to know a lot of different people, you know, with a lot of different difficulties that they were facing, and just have an insight into what life was like for them. So after doing that, I worked on a psychosis rehabilitation ward for about a year and a half, I'd say. And I was basically supporting people who had psychosis to just get back into living into the community, helping them establish daily routine. So again, routine is key. You know, taking them out when they needed to go out, just supporting them. You know, it was shift work, so I'd be there morning through night. That was, again, very, very humbling and eye-opening. Then after that, I trained in low-intensity cognitive behavioral therapy at UCL. So that lasted for about a year. So I'd go to uni and I'd work with clients for the rest of the week, delivering low-intensity CBT. And then I did that for about 3 to 4 years, I'd say. And then I did my high intensity CBT training at King's College. And again, going to uni and offering high intensity CBT throughout the week. And then I qualified, and here I am.
So how long did that take to do?
So from the beginning, I'd say 8 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah. So 8 years to get to this stage. Yeah.
That's kind of similar to what the duration is to become a doctor, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So
I find that really remarkable, because you must have been so committed to being a therapist and to helping people. I find with myself, one of the challenges I found was I couldn't make my mind up as to what I wanted to do for a long time. So I'd say that if you're going to become a therapist, you have to know that you really want to do it, and you're in it for the long haul. There's like quite a lot of work to do it.
Yeah.
What would you say are the skills that you need? Because the first one I'm thinking is you obviously need determination to get through all that education. What other skills do you think are really important?
I think self-awareness is always, with everything, I think self-awareness, because I think how effective you are as a therapist really depends on your ability to be aware of yourself and sit with yourself and go through essentially what you're asking your clients to go through. I think also you need to have a lot of empathy and compassion. I think those are key. You need to have respect for people and their experiences, and understand that everyone has different experiences that have shaped them. We all come from different walks of life, and just because you might not resonate with some of those things doesn't that shouldn't take away from how much empathy you can show someone and the safe space that you can hold for them. I also think communication is also really important, the way you deliver information to the person sitting in front of you, because how I might communicate something to you might be completely different to how I would communicate something to another person. So I think your ability to adapt your practice to account for individual people is really important as well. And like you said, I think, you know, being quite determined, having that self-discipline to just persevere through, because it's challenging. You know, I think there's this misconception that therapists somehow have their shit, oh sorry, can I swear? Just have their shit together, but they don't. They're just human beings. And a lot of them you'll find have actually been through so much themselves, and that's why they got to a point to be a therapist. Because I don't think, you know, just anyone would think, I want to sit there all day and listen to people's struggles and help them. You know, it takes a lot of life energy. I can
imagine. And that was something I was literally thinking as you were talking about this, was like, it must be really difficult to kind of hear all of these like negative things that are going on in people's lives and then shutting off for the day and then going to bed and then getting up in the morning and then having like another full day of like trying to listen to some deep stuff. How do you balance that yourself?
See, that's why I really like cognitive behavioral therapy, because you know how I said there's lots of different types of therapies. And I guess traditional therapy is more like the psychodynamic counselling type of style, where somebody comes, they sit on the couch, they just talk about their problems and you listen and make notes. I think that requires a very special type of temperament to have the capacity to be able to hold that space for someone. Whereas with CBT, it's very here and now focused. So although we do touch on the past to understand perhaps why the here and now is how it is, our main focus is the here and now. And we're looking at any unhelpful thinking or behavioral patterns that are keeping you stuck, and then looking at tools you can apply to come out of that stuckness. So there's always a momentum, there's always a shift happening, which helps you see progress, see things moving, which is why I think I can manage that. But if I was perhaps doing a different type of therapy, I think I would struggle, simply because my temperament, I guess, isn't suited to that. So
that makes sense.
Yeah,
it takes a special kind of person to do a special type of therapy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you ever come across people where they really struggle to like take on some of those disciplines?
Yeah, so, you know, the first session that we have is always an assessment. So I find out a bit more about what your difficulty is, how it's affecting you, and what your goals are for therapy. And I also, you know, I'm very transparent about what CBT involves. And I ask people, is this the right time in your life to actually commit to making a change, taking accountability, self-responsibility, and, you know, applying what you're learning in sessions, because most of the therapy actually happens outside of that 1 hour a week session that you have. So, you know, I make it very clear from the beginning, and I ask them, are there any barriers that are going to stop you from committing to this? Also their goals as well. If their goals, for instance, are, I want to explore the past, I want to unpack situation X, Y, and Z, I would say maybe CBT isn't the best approach, because we don't do exploration, we do change and moving. So yeah, I think the first session is really important. But there are people that have started CBT and, you know, as they go through it, can see perhaps it's not the best fit, and it's about having a very transparent discussion. And it's not that there's anything wrong with them, it's just the therapy isn't the best therapy, and we look at other options. So yeah, it's about being transparent from the get-go, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
What advice would you have given yourself when you first started to think about becoming a therapist?
There is a lot of pain in the world, and, you know, people are struggling, and don't let that intimidate you, because the work you're doing, you're essentially helping them navigate through that pain. Don't let that pain consume you or make you feel hopeless, because it's not your vehicle for change, and you need to always stay grounded in that fact, I think. Because when I started, you know, every other person, I was just shocked by how so many people felt suicidal, so many people didn't want to be here, and that was really overwhelming for me. I just thought, what kind of place are we living in? How can so many people feel like this? So I think that's one piece of advice I would have given myself. Yeah,
definitely. Do you think companies need to be really mindful of how their employees feel.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Because I feel, you know, we're going down the slippery slope of where employees are seen as resources and they're not seen as human beings, having a genuine human experience and reaction to quite demanding, stressful environments and, you know, demands that are placed on them. So I really think that they do need to start taking, it needs to be more than just a tick box approach, you know, more than having a mental health champion or more than, you know, writing a monthly newsletter that has a little paragraph talking about mental well-being. I think employers actively need to be finding out what their employees are struggling with and seeking out, you know, support they can get for their employees that they can invest in, because ultimately if their employees aren't at their best, they're not going to be as productive and the company's going to suffer in the long run. So yeah,
I think it's really important that, because I was trying to think like what would be a good solution for exactly what you're talking about, because when in a previous company that I worked with, they had someone you could essentially go to, but I think it'd be quite scary / you know, you'd feel a bit judged by going to that person. So I think by bringing in maybe even someone like you to come and like do a talk would make so much more sense. And okay, how do I do some of this stuff myself like later on, and how do I manage better without the need to go and sit down and see a therapist every, you know, week or whatever it is. I think that definitely answers the challenge for people who don't want to necessarily directly make it obvious that they are combining their work with therapy that they might want. But the problem with that is that a lot of people, I mean, you could probably inform me on this, is that a lot of people's stress and anxiety comes from work.
Yeah, 100%. I feel, like I said, I think a lot of people feel like they're seen as nothing but a resource. And that's really sad. You know, you shouldn't feel like that. You should feel valued by an employer. You should feel respected. But a lot of people don't. I think a lot of people are facing unrealistic targets with work, just unrealistic pressures and demands. And on top of that, they've got their own lives going on. You know, they've got children, they've got elderly parents, they've got caring responsibilities, they're going through divorces, they're going through bereavements, you know, real life stuff. So where do you find that balance to process all of this? And there's also this stigma associated with telling your employer that you're struggling with your mental health, you know, so a lot of people don't. And there's a lot of people that opt for evening appointments because they're too scared to ask for time off during the day just to attend a remote session, or to ask for an extended lunch to attend a remote session. So I think although there's all this openness about mental health, there's still a lot of stigma attached to it. And I think employers should be mindful of that, and they should actively pioneer to break down that stigma so people feel safe to reach out for help when they need to.
What advice would you give to employers in terms of taking better care of their employees who might be struggling?
I don't know. I think, like with anything, self-awareness again, because I think employers are humans themselves. And I think I've had different employers, and I find the ones that are more self-aware and attuned with themselves are more compassionate and are more open to creating that space in the work environment where mental well-being is prioritized, and it's seen as something that's quite key. I think, you know, employers that perhaps are more disconnected from themselves and cut off and are just focused on, you know, profits and targets and resources, I feel they're the ones that perhaps create a more toxic work environment and don't make that space feel safe. But I think, you know, they should definitely educate themselves just on something as simple as stress and the physical and mental impact that can have on the human being, and just understand, okay, if your targets and your profits are your main priority, you need to make sure you have a workforce that are, you know, working at their best, really, and they're not going to be if their mental health isn't taken care of. So I think definitely that self-awareness and having their priorities, you know, in place, and understanding, your workforce's well-being is key to you, I guess, being successful and achieving the targets you need to achieve.
So definitely that self-awareness piece, and having the right resources in place.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is opportunity for change with where we're at with stress and anxiety at the moment?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. I think even on a psychoeducational level, if employers could get somebody to come in to just give, a 45-minute sort of workshop or talk, just educating people about what stress is, what anxiety is, how it affects you physically, how it affects you mentally, that could be quite validating for a lot of people, because some people don't even understand that what they're experiencing is a stress response. So just taking small little steps to build everyone's awareness, I just think is always the first step, because obviously there's so many other steps you can take, but what I've learned from experience is just focus on one step at a time. So that's why I just think that first step is just making a safe space to really validate and speak about mental health and what it is to be a human being. I think it's key.
And if someone was interested in working with you, what would be like the best way to get a hold of you?
I'd say by email. That's on my Instagram page, but it's info@stresstools.co.uk.
Okay. Sophia, it's been so good having you on the show. I think you've given us a lot of insight to take away, a lot of tools that we can use to help with anxiety and stress. So I think it's going to be an invaluable podcast for people to listen back to. I'm even looking forward to it. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.